In the name of our Lord and Savior, Jai Shah, we welcome you to the latest episode of the BCCI board. This is a special episode because we have with us, as cliched as it might sound, one person who needs no introduction, Jarrod Kimber. Hey, Jarrod.
Yep. Well, you gave me an introduction, technically. I suppose on a podcast, it would be weird if you just said he needs no
He
introduction and then
needs
just
no
left it
introduction
blank.
and then you just start talking, and then you could be anybody. We also have Nishant with us, and Aditya is also with us, but he will just be a silent spectator today.
I'll be the Jay Shah of the pod today.
Yeah, he's the Jay Shah of our podcast. He listens to everything. He says nothing.
He just sort of came on to ruin it there. I like that.
With that said, Jared, I would like to start with. So let's go back to cricket with balls, and could you just do like a brief story of you from cricket with balls to today?
Okay. Yeah. So I started a cricket blog because I was a filmmaker in Melbourne, and that cricket blog was basically something to do when I had a spare moment. I don't know if you guys are basketball fans, but I've got a friend who's a basketball writer. His name's Todd Spear, and at that stage he was starting a basketball blog, and I'd already blogged a bit, and I said to him, "Oh, you should try this and this and this," and he's like, "If you know all this and you know about cricket, why haven't you done a cricket blog?" And it turned out I didn't have a good excuse, so I started cricket with balls, and then it got okay numbers for about a month or 2 months, maybe 3 months, and then bastard Monkeygate scandal happened in SCG, and I basically became the biggest cricket blog in the world in a week. Partly because I think I was Australian and I was taking the piss out of Australia and India, because I think everyone sort of acted like an idiot there at one stage or another. And I think I was the only person writing that. I think all the Indian journalists were writing pro-Indian stories. Most of the Australian journalists were writing pro-Australian stuff. Then you had people like Peter Roebuck clutching at their pearls that the game was over forever and Ricky Ponting would have to be sacked. And I was sort of saying, let's calm down here. Australia have always been cheats and always pushed the game, and so that sort of took off. And then the Wisden Cricketer, the sort of famed magazine, it's now called The Cricketer. I was talking to their deputy editor quite a bit, and he was like, if you came over here, there'd be a career. And at that stage, the filmmaking stuff that we were doing back in Australia wasn't working brilliantly. So I came over and had no idea really how to make a career. I'd never been a journalist before. Most of my writing had been for documentaries and short film projects and music videos and things like that. And then suddenly I was in English cricket, and you can imagine I wasn't exactly like other people in English cricket at that time. And also the blog was so big that even when they tried to ignore me, they kind of couldn't. And it kept getting bigger and bigger. And then eventually that sort of led to doing a little bit of work with Crick Info. And then Crick Info couldn't ignore me anymore. So then they ended up bringing me on. And oh God, since then, what have I done? Commentated for Talk
Everything.
Sports. Yeah, made a film, written 4 or 5 books, I think, at this point. I should know how many, shouldn't I? Maybe it's 5. It feels like 5. Yeah, 5. Let's go with 5. I was the general manager of St. Lucia Stars for a little while. I was the team
I
analyst.
thought you still are.
No, I got let go just before the draft. Disagreement with management is probably or ownership, I suppose, is the best way to put it. And I was the team analyst for who have I been team analyst for? Melbourne Stars, St. Lucia Stars, and Scotland. That's the abridged version. If we really went through my entire resume, that would be the entire podcast. But yeah, I've done some stuff.
So, what's your job as a team analyst is like? Like, is it more like preparing and sharing data of some sorts? Like, I mean, not just stats, but I heard you on a pod once. You said that we need like baseball level data in cricket. So, are you doing something like that, or?
Yeah, I've got little bits of that. A lot of it is so proprietary in cricket, you can't get your hands on it. So I spend a lot of time stealing, begging, borrowing information. But yeah, I suppose it's just, what would it work? It probably works in 3 different ways. The first thing is selection, really. So, whether you're involved directly in selection, which some teams I have been, some teams I haven't. but you're giving information to the coach, the captain, whoever needs it, general manager, whoever needs it in that situation. Then the next thing you're doing as an analyst really is saying to the bowlers, this is the weak spot. This is where you should be focusing to this batsman, and this is where they're going to roughly try and hit you. The next bit is really to the captain to say, these are the matchups and this is how you go. But not all captains want that sort of stuff. Everyone wants something slightly different. Some captains like to be really involved in the stuff with the bowlers, but they're less interested in the general matchup stuff. Other captains just say, tell the bowlers whatever you have to tell them. They can correct me out on the field, but what I want to know is matchups. But everyone is different, and you have different relationships. But those are the sort of basic things you do as a team analyst. You spend a lot of time
video watching and stuff. Like, I mean, when you said, tell the bowlers where to bowl which batsman. So I mean, I guess I'm getting a little more technical, but like, how did you?
Yeah, I mean, you can do video. So when I worked for Scotland, I had to use video because most of the batsmen, there isn't much data on. But realistically, it's better and quicker to be able to go to a spreadsheet and be able to work what lines and lengths they don't like or what angles from over or around the wicket they don't like, rather than watching 500 balls of them facing pace bowling. I can. If I have a batsman who has faced enough top-level cricket, I can tell you in 10 seconds where their hole is, more often than not. Sometimes it's a bit trickier than that, and sometimes you have to do further analysis, and we don't have a lot of information on slow balls, for instance, so you might want to go back and watch video for those sorts of things. But, yeah, I mean, I can tell you off the top of my head that you bowl at Chris Lynn's right hip. That's essentially where you want. That's his hole. Anywhere else, and he'll flat bat you for 6. But he can't do a baseball swing from your right hip.
Wow. Okay.
Quickly going back to Monkey Gate, and I do not really. I mean, we shit on BCCI all the time in this pod, but I'd just like to give the benefit of doubt to Harbhajan, because I just think he does not even know the reference that term can be used in a place like Australia. I honestly feel he was just saying Maki, which means uh, your mother. But anyway, that's just my point of view.
I 100% believe he did it, and he did it on purpose. And I don't think he understood the racial connotations as much as he should have, and he certainly learnt to. But I certainly knew that and this comes from people directly involved. They believe he said it because he knew it would upset Simons. Whether it was a racial thing or not.
I just didn't.
What? How do you need to be smart? All you need to do is read the newspapers or remember the big deal it was a couple of months earlier. I don't think you need to be smart to abuse people. I think Australian cricket, if anyone's proven that you don't need to be smart to abuse cricketers, I think Australians have proved that. Look, it was a dumb sledge that he did, and it's.
I think what Raj means was, like, culturally speaking, there's more possibility that he didn't say. That he actually said what Raj is saying.
Yeah,
but anyway,
it would come organically to him. But it's pointless.
I would say it's an 85% chance he said what we originally thought he said, and a 15% chance that you guys are right, based on everyone that was there, based on people changing their testimony and all those sorts of things. But I mean, it wasn't just that incident. If you remember, it was all the bad umpiring. It was Australia. Catches. It was Anil Kumble. It was the Indians getting involved. I mean, that's why I made fun of everyone, because everyone was involved at a certain level. Do you remember who was it? Was it Ganguly who came out and said that it was just as offensive that Brad Hogg called someone a bastard? And it's like, look, I understand that. And my grandfather was an orphan, so the word bastard means something completely differently in our family than it does to other people, and I understand different cultures of that. But it's not, calling someone a bastard is not quite the same. But that's my point. There were so many great things in that test match and that entire series to make fun of. Everyone, it was just before Twitter came in, right?
Imagine a year before Twitter.
And so cricket writers could write these really pious, nonsensical pieces, and Channel 9 people could say the same, and Indian commentators could say the same, because everything went back in. We talk about echo chambers now. That's nothing compared to what it used to be like. Malcolm Conn's early articles before Twitter existed were mental, and no one was calling him on them. And a big part of Cricket with Balls was literally saying, this has been written somewhere. This is ridiculous. And it did mean I wasn't the most popular person, within the cricket writing establishment when I first turned up, because I was literally saying, this piece is wrong. This piece is stupid. This piece is pointless. And that before Twitter, no one really did that, because you wrote an article and you might get like an angry letter a week later. Suddenly, the whole world changed. And I suppose the blogs sort of were there just before Twitter was.
So, talking of Twitter, and you've been a prolific writer. You write all the time. You've written 5 books.
At least 4, if not 5. Yeah.
5? I'm sure 5. has Twitter changed the way you approach a piece? And a larger question is, how do you look for a story? Like to take an example of the Sreesanth piece that you did. Do you go with a story? How do you find a story?
Twitter. What do I use Twitter for? I use Twitter a lot when I'm at a game. I know it's quite weird. American sports and football writers don't like Twitter much during a game, but that's because their game is so quick. And I think part of writing about cricket is this art of looking down, looking up, looking down, looking up. Obviously, you need to look at the field, and sometimes you might look for an hour without looking at your laptop. I know Peter Robot, who I've already mentioned once, was a big one of that journalists should, shut their laptops for large periods of the game. And I don't disagree with him, but I use Twitter a lot there because it's an idea factory, I find, a little bit. What I originally used Twitter for was more what I used Cricket with Balls for, which is it's almost like I don't want to say a fact-checking service, because that's not quite what I mean, but it's almost like knowing that if I write an article, if I don't get it as right as possible, and that was what Cricket with Balls was really, you would write an article and then you would get 1,000 cricket fans from across the world all coming up with, oh, you didn't mention any Sri Lankan players, or you haven't mentioned the BCCI's role in this, or all those little things. And I think Twitter is, for me, is that kind of thing of being like, okay, I know that this is going to be read by people of vast different backgrounds, educationally, socially, all these sorts of things. I have to make sure that this piece can be understood by a Bangladeshi fan who has limited English, and I have to understand that a professor at Cambridge is going to read this. And Twitter sort of allows that in a way, because you're getting feedback from those sorts of people a lot. So that's kind of the way that I use Twitter, other than the odd journalism request. I was doing a most improved cricketers list, and I could come up with, off the top of my head, about 8 players in Test cricket I knew had improved. But I knew that I would miss some, and there were some that, like, I was looking at it from a very stats perspective, or a very sort of who's the player who everyone's talking about, who people weren't talking about. You put these sort of questions out to Twitter, and suddenly you get this vast sort of array of different kind of answers, and you also understand how people are getting it wrong, which helps you put your work together a little bit. So I suppose I use Twitter in those sorts of ways. And then I just like dumb jokes. So there's a lot of dumb jokes for me.
Yeah, that's the best part of Twitter, I think.
But going back to approaching stories outside of Twitter, even. So there's this term used in cricket, I think, which is used much more in cricket than other sports. It's called flair. So like some players have flair, like Azharuddin had flair, or even Sreesanth has some flair, whereas a Collingwood or a Trot had no flair. So when you're writing about, say, an English cricketer who's traditionally seen as very robotic, to say a Sreesanth or our favorite Azharuddin, how differently would you approach it? Or is it? And I'm asking this because you recently also wrote this piece about our left-handed batsman really prettier, which is also another thing about cricket, right? So how do you kind of emotionally approach these pieces? What do you? I don't know. I guess it's a more complicated question than I had in mind. But yeah, how do you approach them?
I don't think about it that way. So I think about it from a point of view of, so there's basically 2 ways. So either an editor says you have to write about blah, or you go off, and if an editor says it, basically, then I will go off and be like, what is it about this player that interests me? So if it is Trot, for instance, I'm going to be looking at what is it about Trot that interests me. It might be the fact that he is boring, but it might be something else. And the same with that. So there's no difference in the basic thing. if Cricinfo come to me and say, we want you to write about AB de Villiers or we want you to write about Jonathan Trott, there is no difference in the way that I go about that piece, in that I'm going, what is the thing that interests me about these people that I can spin into an idea? Do they represent something? Is it something visual? Is it something mental? Is it something about their record or their technique or whatever it is? Sorry, I just flung my microphone across the room. And then I go from there. The opposite of that is the piece that you just want to write. And I think that in general, you're probably always going to go towards Shahid Afridi type, Brendan McCullum type cricketers. I think I wrote 4 major features on Brendan McCullum in 1 year once. He now follows me on Twitter, but I think for a long time he refused to follow me on Twitter because he thought I was stalking him, which is probably true. So for him, it's not particularly, you can't write 4 features in, like big proper features like that in a year on Jonathan Trott, unless you have access to Jonathan Trott. And I only really got to know Trotty by the end of his career, so I didn't really have that access to write that sort of stuff when he was playing. And I could probably, Chris Wokes doesn't get written about nearly as much, and he probably deserves a huge feature written on him. His story is probably more interesting, but because he's basically a line and length bowler and a handy batsman, he's not sexy to write about. But realistically, there's a huge feature in Chris Wokes that could be written. And the reason it hasn't been written is because he's Chris Wokes. And I think that is quite fair. But for me, the Sreesanth piece is a perfect example of, it wasn't so much that I was thinking he was a flashy cricketer. It was literally that I saw him on Twitter, on stage with the PM of India. And I was thinking, wait, is Modi the PM or the Prime Minister?
Yeah, he's the PM.
Yeah. Sorry, I always get those two confused.
We wish he wasn't, but he
Yes, exactly. And I do mean, Narendra, not Lalit, just in case people get confused there. But It is a cricket podcast after all. But yeah, so I mean, for me, that was far more. I remember him as a cricketer, Sreesanth, but for me, that was far more interesting, and that's where the entire piece started, with me going, "Wait a minute, this guy's a match fixer, and he's on stage with a politician. What on earth has gone on here?" And that's where it started.
So yeah, and that's basically
That's basically
the point.
India.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, we were talking about when we were talking about doing the sport with you, and an example that came to mind was the whole Australian sandpaper gate, right? It happened, and then ICC did not punish them as much as the Australian board did. Now imagine something similar happening in India, and I'm asking you to look it through the lens of the way you saw the whole Sreesanth saga play out. Imagine something like this happening with a Kohli and a Rohit Sharma. Do you think, or I mean, how do you think that would have panned out in a hypothetical scenario?
It's really hard, because if you had as many people in India, percentage-wise, talking about the sandpaper gate that you did in Australia, and if you had the Prime Minister coming out and saying this was the darkest day in Australian sports, and every talking head going on and on and on about it, it would be very hard to just slap Kohli and Rohit Sharma on the wrist if they did this. So it would be a very interesting situation. I think that looking back, Cricket Australia just got it wrong in so many different ways. One, they weren't honest to say this was a team tactic. So that's still, I've done a video today basically calling them out again for that. They didn't get rid of the coach straight away, despite the fact that he was involved. The general manager was involved. The team manager is still there, and he was involved. Everyone in that team knew that something was going on. They might not have all known it was sandpaper, but they all knew that they were tampering with the ball because they had meetings about it. So, if these sorts of details came out in an Indian environment and Narendra Modi made it a huge deal and every talking head in India was slagging them off, I think BCCI would be really harsh and would probably come down quite heavily. It might be tested if it was Kohli. Kohli and Sharma might test it just because Mumbai and Kohli. But, geez, it would be hard to ignore. It was so loud in Australian cricket at that time. But yeah, those sorts of situations are really interesting when you look at them across cultures. Because I think that there are probably other cricket cultures where it just wouldn't have happened. Australia is such a weird cricketing culture in that cricket is it's the biggest sport nationally, but not the biggest sport in any particular market. And occasionally, whether it be Sandpaper Gate or Phil Hughes or even the Monkey Gate thing we were talking about before, just occasionally it just explodes. And Cricket Australia has never been really that good at handling those things. And I think that was another perfect example. I mean, there's no way those guys should have been banned for a year.
Yeah, I always
Yeah.
thought it was more of it was a perception thing. Like,
Yeah, exactly. 100% perception. You're right. I mean, I think the ICC banning Smith for a game and Bancroft not in for a game is, pathetic. They should have got 5 tests each. Australia should have been docked ranking points on the ICC. There should have been, a realistic, thing involved, and also that there should have been a proper team punishment.
Yeah.
So there were things that could have been done, and in fact, in the end, what was done was an overreaction and an underreaction at the same time, which is it would have been very interesting to see how that would have gone in England, West Indies, India, Sri Lanka, and these other places. I think in some cricket cultures, I think somewhere like Sri Lanka, I think they would have, and Bangladesh, I think they would have tried to find a way to justify it. But I think maybe in Australia,
I think even
England,
India,
and
to be honest with you.
yeah, maybe, I don't know. There's so much cable TV noise with those sorts of things that India might have just been too much. But you don't know. I mean, look, Mr. Srinivasan is back, so there was a lot of noise about him. Things change.
So you were just mentioning about having access to Trot to write extensively about someone like Trot. But in this era where every cricketer has a social media account and everyone is telling their story through their Instagram or all those Twitter and everything, has and I ask this because I've been listening to some other Indian cricket journalists and they've been complaining about this. Has access become more difficult to get? And do you think if so, for example, there have been a lot of features on, say, someone like a Virat Kohli, but not the kind of like feature that you could potentially write by like being around him for the for a whole test and how he goes, what goes through his mind or something, right? So has access become different ever since social media has become so prominent?
I mean, cricket is so different in every different country. So a few years ago, I stopped even contacting Cricket Australia. They were so bad at getting back to you with players. It was pointless. ECB, slightly better, but really poor as well. South Africa, always been great in my time. New Zealand, usually quite good. Especially coming from Cricket Info, quite helps. West Indies, not always very good, and partly because I think they're annoyed that Crick Info and Crick Buzz don't have representatives, so they're a bit annoyed when you go up to them. They're like, "Oh, where were you last week when this happened?" It was like, "It's not my job. I'm very sorry." Pakistan, every Pakistani player has like 9 agents. So you're almost dealing with 6 agents to get one interview. India is by far the hardest, and I don't blame them for this. It's a ridiculous market. Usually they have 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 cricket writers that they talk to directly. I'm not sure I've ever had a one-on-one interview with a sitting Indian player. I'm trying to think of any off the top of my head. I can't think of any. They're very well protected. I think if you work at it, you can certainly get good relationships with probably 2 or 3, of the top 15 players. I just don't have the time to sort of build. I don't have the time to sit outside hotel rooms and be in trendy nightclubs and accidentally bump into them. I've never really been that kind of journalist. I really respect those kinds of journalists. There's some good guys in cricket who do that. I've seen Wright Thompson do it when he's worked in cricket. Just not how I work. So if I become friends with a cricketer, even a casual friend, it's usually just almost not by accident, but because we've struck up a friendship over a topic, or we caught up, we ended up in the same bar a few times and telling bad jokes to each other. You can do that with Indian cricketers. You could certainly, Ravi Ashwin is a decent person when I've come across him. I've got a lot of friends in common with Virat Kohli, those sort of things happen. But on a very basic level, what happened was, and this is almost global sport, but cricket really did this. In the old days, most of the journalists would stay in the 5-star hotels that the cricketers stayed in. So when you're in a big city like Mumbai, there's 100 hotels. You're very rarely in the same hotel unless you choose to be in the same hotel as the players, and you don't always know where they're going to stay. When you're in Kandy, or I'm trying to Nagpur. If you're in Nagpur, there's 2 hotels, right? That anyone's going to
At
stay in.
best.
Yeah, there's the Radisson Blue and the other one out in the middle of nowhere that I forget the name of. Tiger, something like that. It's in the middle of nowhere. And the Radisson Blue. And so when I was working for Cricinfo and I knew I was doing the World T20, I literally said to them, look, it's a little bit more expensive to stay in the Radisson Blue, but if I stay there, every umpire is going to stay there. All the TV crews are going to stay there. And my guess is half the teams are going to stay there. And I was right. And so I struck up a bunch of friendships just by sitting in the bar. Late night drinking with, umpires and players and all these sorts of things. So it can happen. But the Indian players don't come out of their hotel rooms very often because they usually have, mostly with Indian players, they have the entire floor booked for themselves. Yeah. And they hang around there. Australian team's quite similar. They're a bit more in the lobby. The Australian team's big coffee guys, as you might have saw on the test. But in a real sense, it's hard. But once you had that split where, there aren't many journalists in the world now that stay in 5-star hotels and travel in business class. And there aren't many journalists who do tour games. That's where you really get to meet people, players, is on tour games. When there's no one around, you can literally sit in the dugout with them because there's no ACSU stuff or any of that sort of stuff. All that sort of stuff is gone. So it's a little bit harder. But you can, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, I probably have decent enough relationships with 15 to 20 guys around the world that are international top-level players. T20 players I found a lot easier to get to know just because they don't have the same restrictions on them. But yeah, it can be hard. It's a very weird art form to sort of get beyond all that. I really respect the journalists who do it. It's just I'm not sure I need to do it, if that makes sense.
But in general, is it easier to do it post-retirement as compared to someone who's playing, though?
Oh, shit, yeah. I mean, yeah. Not in any... Yes. Players go to LinkedIn. Ex-players will link in with anyone because they have to. I've got a running joke with a mate of mine who's a former cricketer that I will contact him when a player is in their mid to late 30s and they connect with me on LinkedIn. Because I say, well, end of the career is coming soon. And his thing is he reckons that they usually do it when they're about 2 years out. They want to plant the seeds. But yeah, a huge named cricket person lost a bunch of their best paying jobs recently and straight away connected with me on LinkedIn. I don't think that's a coincidence. when I was a cricket journalist and they had their big jobs, I couldn't get near this person. So yeah, former players, and it depends on the former players as well. Indian former players, you talk about Laxman and Viru and Dravid, they still have layers and layers of walls. But I'm pretty sure if you guys went on to LinkedIn right now and wanted to look up Damien Fleming, he'd probably accept, And there's lots of players, Colin Miller, decent level players that probably, maybe Michael Kasprowicz might be different, but I'm picking a lot of
Colin Miller was like how you imagine as a younger person to grow up and become a cricketer. I wanted to be Colin Miller because he could spin and he could bowl fast. I mean,
he could bowl fast when he was young.
I mean, you don't see that often happening. Going back to Sreesanth, did you feel that? So in your piece, you keep mentioning that he kept mentioning about his Modi connection, and did you feel that he had, for the lack of a better word, he had an agenda in opening up the way he did, and has your perception of him? I'm sure most of us saw him as a bit of a prick during his playing days. Did that change while you were around him?
There's no high-profile person I've ever... I'll take that back. There are very few high-profile people that you interview that don't have an agenda. It's not how it works. And the agenda might just be to beat the interview. or to make you look like an idiot. Or it could be they're trying to sell something, or they're trying to sell themselves, or, Lance Armstrong's just done a big 30 for 30 documentary. His agenda there is to PR wash himself, right? Michael Jordan's just done The Last Dance. His agenda there is to make a lot of money while being seemingly as honest as possible. But we all know he's much bigger asshole than he's portrayed in that. Wow, I'm a basketball fan.
And
I know
he's
he's
annoyed a number of people.
Yeah, he annoyed a few people, but it's, I've read the Jordan rules, and I reckon he got worse later in his career. So there's always that agenda there. I mean, Sreesanth was quite interesting because I think he went random journalist, crick info, didn't really know much about me, said, come and hang out. He was gonna tell me what was what, and I would go away and write a piece, and at least he'd be in the news, I think is what he thought. And then it's in the piece. I'm pretty sure I write about it in the piece. About halfway through, not even the first time I chatted to him, in the morning. So we got back from the gym, went to his lounge room. We started chatting, and he was really standoffish, which doesn't help. I'm the kind of feature writer that I don't know how long I've got with this guy. I need him to be himself as quickly as humanly possible, right? And I couldn't work out a way. I made jokes, and he didn't get the jokes, and I flattered him, and he didn't seem to care. Nothing really worked until he started talking about how if I really wanted to understand corruption in cricket, I had to watch this documentary called Death of a Gentleman. And I'm sitting there going,
when I was reading that piece, I wanted to know, what was your reaction exactly?
I couldn't work out if he was joking at the start. Because he is, he's not a brilliant joke teller, but he's a bit of a laughable, funny guy. And I was like, so the long story about that film, if you have a look in that film, I'm quite fat, right? I had actually started to lose weight, but by the end of that film, it took 4 years. I probably lost 15 kilograms while making that film, right? So I would do Q&As where I would get up as the director and star of the film and do a Q&A and have people go, sorry, what was your connection with the film? And I was like, I was just on the screen for 50 minutes. And so I suppose I should have realized that he was one of those people. He just didn't pick it up. But yeah, so then I sort of say, look, I made that film, and he was a completely different person after that. And he was a real human being. He was really honest, I think, with me. He said, look, I was an asshole beforehand. I was a bit of a dick. I loved the famous life. I did things I shouldn't have done. He never quite ever came out and said he fixed. But I got a real strong feeling from him, which is why I wrote it in the piece, that he certainly had fixed. Whether he fixed this game, I don't know. And I really don't know. I get the feeling that something had happened and he was supposed to fix this game and he decided he didn't want to, would be my guess, which means he still probably should have been suspended, but for nowhere near the way that he was. But he was very honest, and he said, look, I did things, but trust me, everyone did things. And as someone who's looked into corruption within cricket, I know he's kind of right. So there was certainly that was going on. My perception of him was, I didn't really have one, but you go in and look, I'm a massively left-wing person, and he's a BJP politician.
Do we want to go there?
Yeah.
We can talk about it, actually.
He's also a complete, he was an arse clown when he played, let's be honest. And all I can remember is him being a really talented outswing bowler, but an arse clown and a bit of a dick and a show-off. I'd enjoyed that, but, I can't imagine me and him ever going to the pub and having a conversation about anything, really. But because...
Sorry, go on, Nishant.
Yes, sorry, I'm almost finished. But
Yeah,
basically, because we got so deep together, and we spent quite a bit of time together and chatting, even afterwards, and me going back and forth. He was very honest with me. I reckon he was as honest with me as he could be without saying he actually fixed games. And he couldn't. I don't think he can say that legally. So I got to know him, and what I got to know was a guy who was a dick, who realized he was a dick and has that showy offy nature that he'll never get rid of, and he kind of loves, but he also realizes that it's got him in trouble at times. But I also got to see the other side of him, which was the family guy, who has a I see him as a family guy who was broken as a man, but still has that performer's outset. And look, my mum was in the theatre. I grew up with actors, And he came across as a bit of a ham to me, who underneath it is probably not the worst person in the world, even if politically he is the worst person in the world.
Yeah, I mean, see, working in theater and the kind of movies that Sreesanth did, which you also also mentioned, like worlds apart. So I don't know, but what I wanted to ask you was, so you also mentioned one of the cab drivers in Kochi. No, was it Kochi or no? It was just like in Kerala. You say, right, in your piece.
Yeah, would have been. Oh, you could have been in either. Yeah, because I was staying in. Is it what's the island, the peninsula bit? Is that Kochi? I've now forgotten.
Yeah, it's Kochi.
It's Kochi.
Peninsula.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but then obviously he was in the other part of Kochi. So
Yeah.
I was in the touristy part, not on purpose. Just I didn't really know that much about the place beforehand.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got taxi drivers in the touristy part and in the main part of town, and also around other bits of Kerala as I had to travel around.
So I mean, my question was, what sense did you get from like the cab drivers or other people around? Like, is he perceived more like a fallen hero than a fixer, or
I think
because even his dad basically blamed Dhoni, right? He just said that my kid's life was
Which
ruined
is
by
the trend in Indian cricket. Even Yuvraj's dad.
yeah.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. None of you guys are from Kerala, I assume.
No.
So
But I've been there.
Yeah. So I learned quite a bit about the place. So, to write one of the reasons I was quite interested, and I can't remember if it was Kartik who I worked with at Crick Info, but he spent a lot of time sort of chatting to me about it and saying it's a very interesting place because they don't have cricketers. So I know the cricket places, right? I know Chennai quite well. I know Mumbai quite well, Bangalore, those sort of cricket hotspots, the biggest cities. You get Kolkata, although it's not a cricket hotspot anymore. But when it was, I kind of know those places. I spent a lot of time. I've been to India, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 times at this point, right? My friends half of my friends are from Bangalore or Chennai. I know those places the way that I know Nottingham, and the way that I know, Wellington and those sorts of places. Kerala, I didn't know, partly because there's no cricketers from there, and it's not a cricket place. So the first thing is trying to work out what that means. And I suppose when you get there, you work it out very quickly that if Sreesanth is no good, they don't have anyone else. I think they had a couple of, at that stage when I was there, they had a couple of good IPL players that were sort of, Indian team, almost quality.
Sanju Samson.
Samson was the big one, I think, at that point. There was another younger one coming through as well, I think, off the top of my head.
Sachin Baby.
Yeah. So Sachin Baby was at that stage already looking like a fringe player. Samson was a slightly better player, but it looked like he wasn't going to make it as a regular Indian player. So they had one guy, and then they have this whole other culture, which I'd love to go back and write about this other culture, which is that almost all the Olympic athletes are from Kerala. And they think that they represented India at the Olympics and didn't get any credit for it, right? Which is not really true when you read through. But I can India have this weird relationship with the Olympics, which again I'd love to write about one day. Where it's almost like you guys don't believe it exists at all until you win something. And for a nation of 1 billion people, your Olympics is pathetic.
We could talk about this. I mean, there's so many different reasons for it.
Exactly. And there are. So, but imagine being from Kerala, right? You've had one cricketer. He's a match fixer. And the only other thing that you're famous for is Olympians, and the rest of the fucking country doesn't care, right? I think that there's this big thing on their shoulders of no matter what we do, you guys find a way to fuck it up. You find a way to ignore it or marginalize it. And I think that, there's a lot of corruption around that particular match fixing case. There's a lot of corruption around it because of Lalit Modi. Because of Dhoni and Chennai, because of what happened with Srinivasan after that as well. All of that sort of stuff happened, and they're like, our guy, there's not even enough evidence to 100% agree, and I'm on their side with the evidence. Our guy gets screwed over, our one hero, and everyone else gets a clean chit. And it's like, I get that. I do. I honestly get that. And I think there's a lot of that. And then if you're a sports fan and you've only got Sreesanth. Sorry, you're Sreesanth. Javagal Srinath is not involved in this. Let's be honest. If you've only
but who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. How far does it go? But essentially, if you've only got that one guy, you then, as a sports fan and as a bloke who chats in a bar and as a guy who talks nonsense with your neighbor, you then have to concoct the stories, don't you? And that's what you start to do. And Sreesanth pushes them out, as you said, his father, some big politicians, some big lawyers. Everyone's got a different thing. And by the end, you kind of have this sort of random narratives. And what I wanted to, and I was really lucky because the taxi drivers, they were all over it. Everyone had a different theory about what had happened. I'd go into a bar and the guy behind the bar would tell me one thing. I'd go into a hotel, check in. Why are you here? I'm here about the cricket. Oh, Sreesanth, he never... I keep saying fucking Sreesanth. Sreesanth, he didn't do anything. I know. I don't know. Maybe I left him out. But you start getting these kind of narratives. And for someone like me who writes these kind of features, it ends up becoming this... Kerala becomes a character. And that's what I really wanted. I wanted Kerala and, Kochi, because I was there, but Kerala and Kochi to be the character. And luckily, sometimes you go to these places and no one really says anything, or they just go, yeah, we don't like him anymore. Like if you went to Melbourne, I wonder if you'd get the full Shane Warne story, or if you went to Melbourne to write a big piece about Shane Warne, everyone would be like, oh, we're bored of talking about him, mate. And I think sometimes that sort of stuff happens. Sreesanth, they were all in. I couldn't even write their full story sometimes because they were so elite. I couldn't have told them legally. It was great.
So, and this is not a question per se. This is more of a speculation. But so Kerala is one of those states in India where BJP has not been able to do much.
Yeah.
It's been a traditionally communist state, and then and Sreesanth comes in and he joins BJP and runs for the. He lost, right, Nishant?
He did lose.
Yeah, he did.
He got 40,000, 25,000 votes. He got a decent share of the votes. I think BJP, not long after I was there, I think actually did quite well. Maybe the next election or maybe the next cycle, and then
they have like 14%, 14% votes in the state, but still there's a long way to go, I feel.
Yeah,
but
yes. So they had done something. So yeah, it was interesting. People kind of ignored that. I found I did try and check. Even Sreesanth. I was probably because I'm a political person as much as anything. I really wanted to get his views. I didn't want to slag him off, although there's no way I would not have slagged him off had he told me his views. And we certainly have very different. When we very loosely talked about politics, we couldn't have been sort of more separate people. But I did get the feeling that he wasn't maybe a BJP. Compared to Gautam Gambhir, who I've never met, but listening to Gautam Gambhir feels like he's a proper conservative person, BJP person. Yeah. I felt with Sreesanth maybe is slightly conservative and probably likes some of the things that they do, but actually deep down, I think saw it as another opportunity, another way to clear his name. And I think the BJP probably saw him, as any political party would, as someone famous enough who might get a few votes and help them out. I didn't get the feeling he was a BJP loyalist.
Yeah, sorry, they have a lot. I mean, they have a lot of celebrities. That's their way.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So,
especially, and I noticed, and I didn't write about it in the piece, but I did look it up. They're very clever, and they're not the only political party in the world that does this, but they're very clever in the places they're not going to win, getting a celebrity to stand for them just so they get more publicity. So that next time when they have a proper person, that person will start on a slightly higher level.
So so India is primarily a conservative country. It's largely a conservative country, and every person. So Gambhir or even Sreesanth, they're popular because they're good at playing a sport. That does not tell us anything about how much they can or cannot think, right? And I feel unless you like invest some time in going through like the policy and how it affects the country at large, your by default nature will be to be conservative, especially and there's so you recently did this pod with Dan Gallen about the South African cricket, the black cricketer in South African cricket, right? And this is just something that, and maybe this is not a question that I prepared, but from our discussion this just came to my mind. But there is a huge caste angle in India, and the players who come up through the ranks have, of course, you cannot see caste as you can see color because there. But there's a lot of opportunity to do something around that, because 99% of the players that come up and end up playing for India are basically the so-called upper castes, and they are traditionally big with BJP as well. So there's that link. But going back to the whole Sreesanth saga, and even before that, death of a gentleman, the way, I mean, you guys, I mean, you called out BCCI, rightly so, but the reaction to it, did you see the first seeds of India moving toward a more right wing uh, politics? I mean, I know in hindsight, I'm asking. In hindsight, does it seem like you should have seen, and even in Monkey Gate, the way Indian board, because we've talked about this, that a lot of what happens in India politically could be seen in BCCI 10 years before that happens in politics.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you look at India kind of opened up as a cricket market before it did as a global market, I think, in many ways. So anyone who's sort of following that, and I was maybe not as closely as I should have, but I certainly was. You could see that coming. And the next thing is, I remember hearing a conversation, I think really early on, between Lalit Modi and Sambit Bal, the editor of Cricket Info. And Sambit told me this, and I reckon it must have been early 2000s that this story happened, when Sambit showed him, I think it was a magazine cover, or it was a Cricket Info page, or I can't remember where Sambit was at that stage, but with, I think maybe it was Rahul Dravid on the cover. And or on the website, whatever it was. And Sambit said, look what we're doing for your players. And Modi said something along the lines to him of, yeah, you shouldn't be able to do that. We should own that logo. You should have to pay us every time you show it. And obviously Lalit Modi is a different person. And I would say that, to be fair, I mean, he's a genius, and he's obviously corrupt, and I don't trust him at all. But he's also a genius in many ways. But he's also, when you hear someone saying stuff like that, who is that important, you start to think, they can do anything. They stopped photographers getting into the ground because they wanted all the photos to be taken by them. They started making the commentators sign all those forms that basically said you can't say anything. The ICC do that now, and West Indies Cricket Board did, although I think they've stopped doing it for their TV thing. But again, that's a similar thing, and you notice that in cricket first, and then you start to see it come into politics. And I probably don't follow Indian politics as much now as I have in the past, especially when you were writing about cricket politics all the time as I used to. You had to, whereas now I don't have to as much. But yeah, I think you certainly saw that sort of thing. Also, just on and I think you will see this more and more. India has been treated poorly by England, by other countries. Ignored by America, looked down on by most of the West. And if you grew up in that society, I mean, Srinivasan, he makes jokes that aren't quite jokes at ICC events, where he says, "Oh, a lot of white people here today. This is like the East Indian Tea Company." Right? And you know where he's coming from. And he's not wrong either. I always used to say to the ICC, 80% of the journalists are Asian. You can't have Western media managers who don't understand how Asian journalists work. I honestly, one of my things when I'm out at ICC events is training the ICC media people unofficially. This is what they're doing behind your back right now, because you don't know. And this is going to cause a huge problem for you tomorrow. And I won't get to the full details of some of that. And other times I'm trying to help the journalists and go, you can't film in here, mate. If the ICC finds you in here, you're gone. That's the end of your tournament, doing what you're doing. So, you need to hire the right people. But there's also that whole thing of, it's like, I remember when Death of a Gentleman came out, Mihir Bose said, well, it was okay for England and Australia to run the cricket however they wanted. But India does it, and suddenly they make a documentary about it. And it's like, well, firstly, our film is also about how Australia and England are still behaving poorly. And secondly, being treated poorly doesn't justify treating other people poorly. Exactly. You're supposed to be the ones who see it and break the cycle of abuse, if you will. And, exactly. And I understand why people wouldn't do that, because I do understand normal human emotion. But there is a certain point where you're just like, if you're saying that Australia and England stunted cricket's growth around the world because of the way that they ran cricket, and then you come in and you do the same thing, then as far as I'm concerned, you're now the enemy as well. And I think that's where a lot of them got upset. That I have been taken aside by so many people going, don't you understand the veto decision? I'm like, yeah, I do. It was terrible. And if I was writing back then, I would have been slagging it off. Instead, I'm slagging you off for what you're doing. So I think there's that whole thing. And I think that in cricket, they're just so powerful that they're able to throw their weight around, and they haven't quite got to that place politically around the world. But, we know that is going to happen one way or another. India is going to become a global superpower. And they are going to be able to throw their weight around at a huge level. And I think what we've seen in cricket, we will see politically and in business and in, other facets. And, that makes sense. If,
So
I
the
don't.
T20 World Cup's going to be postponed for the IPL, right?
The T20, well, this is the thing. This is where the whole thing gets confused. The T20 World Cup should be postponed, right? Because you should not be playing international sport at the moment where people have to fly from all around the world for an event. You should not be doing that because people are dying, and it doesn't make sense to continue that. The
same holds for the IPL also, right? I mean,
no. Well, this is where I think it's different. I think domestic leagues make a lot more sense at the moment because you don't have to fly in from other countries. You can literally contain them in a way that you can't contain international sporting events. You just can't. You shouldn't be playing a World Cup at the moment or an Olympics. I just do not. No one will be able to do that. But the thing is, no one frames it that way because the ICC have been backing down to the BCCI over and over again. I mean, if Ganguly becomes president, it's a laughing stock at this point that we even have an ICC, right? So if that's the case, the best argument is the simple thing of we should do this because it's a domestic tournament. But no one's looking at it that way, and it won't be spun that way by anyone outside of India because of what the BCCI has become. So they've become. Sreesanth talked about the BCCI not being an ogre within cricket, and the funniest thing for me is the fact that BCCI is such a split personality organisation. There are so many people within the BCCI that hate each other. That just flat out hate each other. And the thought that it's one big group that's evil is ridiculous. There are people within the BCCI that hated Sreesanth and what he was trying to do, just as much as there are a bunch of people who will suck up to him because he's powerful. And I think that in this situation, they just don't care what the media say anymore, and they don't spin it in any good way. The best way to spin it would be, we're not trying to take over that window. We think we can run a tournament in that window. And if they're really smart, they'd say CPL should probably be running that tournament too, and maybe another. There's no reason why we can't have a bunch of tournaments at that time that are domestic that don't involve international travel, because that's kind of where the problem is. We don't want there's no reason for cricket to move this virus to another country. We should not be in that situation. So that's where the BCCI sort of get into this other thing. But, it's a bit like America, isn't it? Not everything that America do is blatantly evil. But there's a certain point where it's hard for them to spin anything because they've done so many things that are blatantly evil.
Talking of BCCI, so there's this interesting phenomena that we keep talking about. So India and Pakistan cricket. As long as you've heard of it, right? Indian Pakistan cricket. As long as someone like Modi or BJP is in power, it will the cricket, the bilateral relationships will not improve. However, because of this large number of people who watch cricket in India, there's one interesting phenomena that's happening is that a lot of Pakistani ex-cricketers are opening up these YouTube channels, and like everyone from Rashid Latif to Basit Ali to I don't know, like Sohail Tanveer, everyone has Mohammad Wasim, everyone has a YouTube channel, and these channels start as talking about Pakistani cricket, but at some point just become this pandering channel toward Indian cricket, and they just keep doing episodes like how good Kohli is or wow.
I mean, at one point they were covering, was it Bol Wasim or like they were actually covering Indian domestic cricket.
Yeah, they were so they were covering Cricket Cafe. They were covering Indian domestic cricket,
Can
like
I just
Vijay Hara
say,
intro.
I have a YouTube channel as well, and I didn't realize this is what you're supposed to do. So my next 10 videos will be doing this.
No, please don't do it.
This
I really like your new channel. I wanted to ask you something about it towards the end, but yeah.
and just doing like Shoaib Akhtar does this, and Shoaib Akhtar has become one of the top 10 fastest growing YouTube channel last year. He got this whole thing. I don't know if you noticed, but
He's always
my
fast.
question, yeah, exactly. This channel is 100 miles per
100
hour.
miles per hour. Yeah.
But have you seen that also change in cricket writing as well? As in, now do people expect cricket writers to have stories that talk more about Indian cricket, or even if they are not directly related to Indian cricket, somehow tangentially mention about Indian cricket so that they're read more?
Look, I mean, Michael Vaughan's a very good example of someone who's worked this out and done very well with it. My big thing is, so I've been doing this since 2007, and I've always had a big Indian market in Cricket with Balls did, my Twitter feed does, Crick Info obviously did. Most of the things I do is weirdly there are certain things where you get a lot of Indian and Pakistani, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh fans go to one thing. With the podcasts, for whatever reason, Australian, English, South Africans seem to like those. But then you do the video channel and you get these. But in a general sense, I'm kind of always working for Asian markets, even if they're American Asian rather than based in India. You're kind of always doing that. And since the start, what I've noticed is that everyone thinks that the money is in India and that they will get the money from India. And the one thing I've noticed is money doesn't come out of India easily, right? And so if you're some writer and you suddenly think that you're going to write a bunch of pieces that are going to be shared by Indians, and that you'll end up with a column in the Hindu Times.
Times of India.
Times of India,
Times of
Hindustan Times. It's Hindustan.
Hindustan Times. Sorry,
Yeah.
Terrible with newspaper names. I always get the English ones confused too. I don't really read newspapers. But if you think you're going to get a column with them, you're not, right? You're not going to get a column with them. And if you do get a column with them, chances are they're not going to pay you very much because they don't have to pay Indian writers very much or Pakistani writers very much. And so you're not going to get a TV gig. And if you are going to get a TV gig, you're probably it's not going to work really unless you speak Hindi.
Like Simon Dool does that on CrickBuzz.
Yeah, I mean Brett Lee,
Yeah.
he's tried it, and there's a few. I wanted to learn a language, and I started to learn Hindi just because I thought it might help my career, but also I want to learn a language that's nothing like English. I just didn't have the time in the end to do it. At the time, I was also learning chess, guitar, and skateboarding because I was trying to teach my sons, and I was like, well, something has to lose out, but. If I spoke Hindi, I think I'd get more work. But there's a very real reason. So I think people try it a lot. And I remember 2008, I think, Wisden Cricketer. It was my first big job in cricket, writing on their website. And I wrote a piece that said, is Sachin Tendulkar the most overrated batsman since Don Bradman? And it was just a comedy piece, right? But the Wisden Cricketer really pushed it. And it took off, and they were like, yeah, we cracked the Indian market. Until the next piece is not about India. Do you know what I mean? You have to, the only way to do it is to be all in all the time. And even then, there is a certain point where you can't speak Hindi and you can't follow it properly. And you probably, if you're a cricket fan from another country, you're probably not going to be that interested in Indian cricket. If you're Freddie Wild, Freddie Wild loves the IPL. But you know what? Freddie Wild also likes the CPL. And he's also interested in the Big Bash. And eventually, they just tune out and they go away. And I worked out quite early on with Twitter that I just didn't care. I could have 4-5 times the amount of Twitter followers I had if I just tweeted through every IPL game. I know that. I saw other people do it. And I just went, I don't care. Sometimes I like to watch a game and not even tweet, believe it or not. I'm certainly not going to tweet about every Indian prospect. But when it comes down to it, I just don't think it works financially the way that people think it does. And so it doesn't go anywhere. There's no end game for it. Does that make sense? Like to this point, CrickBuzz is a bigger website than CrickInfo, right? But Cricinfo is worth a lot more money than CricBuzz for a couple of reasons. One, people read the articles on Cricinfo, which means it's seen as a more boutique product. People spend longer on Cricinfo because they read the articles, and also they spend longer on the scorecards. And I don't know if that's because the fans are older, but I think CricBuzz people are more app people, so they go on the app, then they go off, which also means that the advertisers work. But the other thing is that CricBuzz's audience is almost entirely Indians in India. And you don't make as much money. You need 100,000 or 200,000 Indians compared to 1,000 UK people or 1,000 US people. When you're talking about those, when you talk about advertising, and I probably haven't even got the numbers right there. And I've seen this. I've seen this in not for Cricinfo or CricBuzz, but I've seen it with other cricket websites and other cricket products that I've been involved with. It doesn't work. Then the market isn't as strong as you think. And so, like, a couple of years ago, I did to get some video out of Cricket GIF. Cricket GIF gave me video for St. Lucia, and I offered to do them articles. And they were just like, could you write about Pakistani cricket? Fine. Okay, here's an article on Pakistani cricket. Could you write about Muhammad Amir? Fine, here's a piece on Muhammad Amir. Could you write a piece on Virat Kohli? And I'm like, guys, look, I can do all this, right? But I can write a random piece about something else and get you as many followers because my followers don't care. Right? And Cricket GIF followers, people aren't that easily sucked in to a certain point. And also the people who are sucked in don't make you money, and then they will come for that one article and disappear. Right? You're much better off writing. So it hasn't changed cricket writing as much as you would think, would be my point. I mean, look at this. The most obvious thing is that Wisden India crashed and burned, right? They tried everything at Wisden India. They tried clickbait. They tried being sensationalist. They tried being massively pro BCCI. They tried everything they could, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because the quality of the writing, they didn't have enough good writers writing enough good stuff to basically make a website work. That's why they didn't work. It wasn't because they couldn't occasionally make a piece go viral. If you want one piece that gets 100,000 views, yeah, sure, tell me why Virat Kohli has the biggest penis in modern cricket, right? But if you want, obviously, can we put that in the title so we can get more hits for this particular podcast? But if you're trying to build something consistently that works and get advertisers in, that shit doesn't work. It just doesn't. And it's different if you're going after purely the Hindi-speaking market.
Exactly.
Is a completely different kind of market. The minute you go after English-speaking Asian cricket fans, it's not the same market at all. So if you're a Western person trying to do it, it doesn't work. It might work for the Pakistanis.
And that's why I recommend. So if you're a Pakistani who could speak in Urdu, which is basically Hindi,
exactly,
then you will get that kind of. Interestingly, during the World Cup, when the England-India match happened and India lost that match, I think it was Rashid Latif's channel where he said that maybe India fixed the game so that Pakistan could not get into the semifinals. And then he had to apologize because that's the kind of reaction he got from, because it's mostly the Indian fans who listen to it. So everybody learned their lesson. For you, being a person of Caucasian heritage, might I suggest doing Bollywood reviews?
Yeah, it is fair, actually. I think... so I've got the production company who make my videos are actually Indian, but the guy who runs it, Arya, is from Pondicherry, and is the poshest bloke I've ever met from anywhere, and he speaks better French than he does Hindi. So I think I'm kind of screwed on that. I think I'm with the wrong production company from that. No, look, I've been basically with, other than, if you look at the sort of Cricinfo wave, so from 1993 through to 2005, that was sort of Cricinfo's world. That was the first wave. I've basically been with internet through internet cricket through the second and third waves, which is probably blogging, websites, and then Twitter and social media. It just doesn't really work. It's just, I can understand why people think it does, but it just, to me, I don't think you can make money off it. And I think eventually they just think, well, we'll find someone Indian to do that as well. And it's very hard. Just on a purely logistical thing, it's not actually easy to get paid from Indian companies outside of India. I found it easier from Pakistani companies and Sri Lankan companies. It's quite hard to get money out of India on a logistics point of view, I find, let alone getting them to commit to anything. And there are still people owed money by IPL franchises. Good luck getting it out of some random cricket website.
And I completely agree. I think the podcast title could be "Why Indians Are Miser," because that
Which I never said, by the way. But I think it makes sense. I kind of look at India very much, and this is not so much a cricket point, but I always look at India as America. There's
in cricket.
no, not even in cricket. Like if you look at America, the way they grew, basically America went from being not even a big player on the global market to being the biggest player on the global market and ignoring Europe and the rest of the world, right? I mean, Americans don't know anything about the rest of the world. They're phenomenally, isolated in the way that they see the world. Like if you write a piece for an American website, my God, do you have to explain anything that's not, on NBC?
Yeah.
To a shocking degree, right?
Yeah.
And I think India might do the same sort of thing. So they don't need Gideon Haig and Jarrod Kimber, they don't need Richie Benaud. They've got their own guys who do it in their own style. And Indian style is nothing like other styles, in the same way that American style wasn't like other styles. So for me, I'm fine with that. And it doesn't matter to me, right? I'm going to have a career anyway because I write about cricket. There's always going to be a career for the person who can write about cricket correctly. So it doesn't matter to me. Occasionally I'll write a piece and, look, I've written about Virat Kohli and I can't open Twitter for a month, right? That happens. I've written about a Pakistani cricketer and I will get 300 Facebook requests from Pakistani fans, right? These things happen. But you can't actually build on that. I just don't think it's a solid thing. And I actually think it's great that not just Hindi, obviously, but all the different languages in India are so strong, and there isn't just an English market, because I think that means that what you'll get is incredibly interesting, talented cricket pundits and commentators and all sorts of things coming through because of all that.
I think I think you make a fair point, and I think one of the reasons that Pakistan or ex-Pakistani cricketers do so well, especially with their YouTube channels, is because they speak in the language that a large part of India understands, and that's it's a similar trend as I was saying. I have been seeing in Bollywood films reaction by white people. So the Indian crowd looks for validation outside of India,
I mean,
unlike America.
David Warner's TikTok.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that's happening as much as it did a few years ago. I don't think it's the same as it used to be. It's not like when Brett Lee made that music video. I think what you get now is you do get when Warner does something to a Indian product that people feel it a little bit. But it's not like the old days where like an Australian cricketer would say something nice about India and it would be front page news. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of things have moved on. I think that's where I think India's in a great place where they will become like another America. Maybe not a great place because eventually it leads to Donald Trump. But we
already have it. So.
Well, you got a different kind of Donald Trump. But yeah, I think, but what I don't think that you need the validation. Look, I write about all the subcontinental nations, so a little bit on Nepal, Afghanistan. They're not as famous in cricket, but I've written about them, so I know about their fan bases. I know a lot about Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh, Sri Lankan fan bases. My wife's family is Sri Lankan. I've been to India 100 times, and most of my most rabid fans are Pakistani. I really know about those fan bases. India is nothing like the other ones. They have matured in their 12 or 13 years that I've written about cricket massively. Now, there's still that. There's always going to be that thing. But have a look at one of the biggest cricket websites in Pakistan is Pak Passion. Honestly, if anyone in cricket ever says something nice about Pakistani cricket, they capture that and that's a post, right? That's one of the biggest website in cricket in India is Cricket Buzz. They don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't. Terry Alderman says something nice about a Pakistani seamer. It's not front page of Crick Buzz, is it? Do you know what I mean? So I do think there's a maturity there. And I want to really go back here. I'm a cricket historian. Australia used to do this. South Africa used to do this. New Zealand used to do this. It's as nations grow and feel more comfortable in themselves. Australia, I remember Will Smith came to Australia when I was there for a Big Bash game. Channel 7, Channel 9, and Channel 10 at the same time. I was at the MCG. He was at the Big Bash game. At the same time, all three were running different Will Smith stories on the TV. You can see them in the press box. I was like, they were so happy that a famous person was there and had gone to the Australian Open and the Big Bash, right? That they were all running stories at the same time about Will Smith, who was only there because he'd made a stinker of a film and had to flog it, right? And we know that in Australia. We literally know that Hollywood stars only come to Australia to flog films that have already bombed somewhere else or are going to bomb somewhere else, right? And yet, oh my God, it's Will Smith. I understand this sort of stuff. This doesn't go away. It doesn't go away till you become America.
Fair. In India had Will Smith in one of their film award shows, and they made him dance.
We did that Richard here also, right? So
If you like cringe videos, you'd love that video. I'll send you a link. But it has been great talking to you, and we've covered almost everything that we planned to cover. I just had one question out of syllabus that we did not decide.
Sure.
In the 90s, mid 90s, and this is just because we just talked about Australian cricket and how it has grown over time. But do you remember Greg Ritchie playing Mahatma Kote?
Yeah. I
How
mean,
does that-
I don't think you guys know how famous he was for that. He was more famous for Mahatma Kote than he was as a cricketer, and like by a factor of 100 to 1. He wasn't that famous a cricketer. He was, a Travis Head level cricketer, maybe. He had a couple of good years, but Australia was stinking back then. If he wasn't fat, I don't even know if he would have been remembered. I mean, he was a really good batsman. I hate saying that because he's a racist and an arsehole.
But like, how do you guys see that period now? And when I say you guys, I mean you and your contemporaries who are more liberal.
I think so he got famous on a bunch of football shows, weirdly, for this character. So there was only one Melbourne sports radio station back then. There's two now, I think. Yeah, two now. And they had a breakfast show, and he would call in like twice a week and do a comedy skit. And I would say to my dad, this is racist and stupid, right? And I was 15, 16. And I don't think we got it, weirdly, because it's a bit like Apu, right?
Yeah.
There weren't many Indians in Australia in 95, 96. In Melbourne, I grew up with Sri Lankans everywhere. 2 houses down, my mum's best friend is a Sri Lankan. Opposite the road, the little girl I used to play with, she's Sri Lankan. My first babysitter was a Sri Lankan, right? My whole street is full of Sri Lankans. I went to school with Sri Lankans. Sri Lankans were everywhere. Then when I started playing cricket, I played cricket with a lot of Bangladeshi guys that they lived in a couple of suburbs over. I knew a lot about Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Outside of cricket, I knew nothing of India. It just didn't exist to me outside of the cricketers, right? And I think that sort of Apu level of thing sort of happened. And Australia was an incredibly weird racist society. I always look at Australia very similar to America in that it allows you to transform and become American or Australian really quickly. Usman Khawaja is Australian, right? Yeah. In a way that my wife, who is born and bred and has the poshest English accent of all time and went to Oxford and Cambridge, is still seen as a British Asian in England, right? And I would say the racism in England and France is probably lesser than Australia and America. But Australia and America just give you this chance to become one of them, right? But the actual open racism in Australia and America is off the charts. Well, we had a show called The Woke Boy. There was a sitcom called Acropolis Now that became a movie called The Woke Boy, and there was a play called Wogs Out of Work. It's a whole genre that came out of Australians being racist against Greeks and Italians who they didn't see really as normal white people, right? And that show was huge in the 90s, early to mid 90s. And that was a show that was taking the piss out of Australians for being racist, but was also popular with white Australians at the same time that Mahatma Kote was popular for being an Indian and shaking his head, right? And browning up. Let's not forget browning up. Because I remember him more as a radio guy, but he was brown, putting the makeup on and everything as well, right? And you've also, the 12th man, I don't know how big the 12th man is and if you guys know, but, that's racist by modern standards. And it was kind of racist by the end of its run. And Mahatma Kote, a similar thing happened, I think. I think eventually people just went, it's no good. Early 2000s, if India played, half the posters would be about Apu in the stands. Who's running the Quickie Mart? That it was openly racist against Indians until Indians were everywhere and your neighbor was Indian. And then things changed. There was that little period where we were beating Indians up a lot in Melbourne. I don't know if you guys remember that, but I lived in that suburb. I mean, that suburb was terrifying if you were white, black, or Asian, to be fair. And I used to walk around the Asian parts of that suburb because I figured that I was less likely to be beaten up there. You shouldn't have suddenly put 3,000 poor middle class Indian kids in a heroin suburb. It would be my tip as a general rule. But it was a racist place. It is a racist place in many different ways. And Mahatma Kote is just ridiculous. And I almost tweeted this today, but I just couldn't be bothered because I'm so sick and tired of slagging off Mahatma Kote. And I've called Greg Ritchie racist on Cricinfo a bunch of times, and you get death threats from Queenslanders who love him as a stand-up comedian, hilariously, more than a cricketer.
The funny thing is,
but he lost weight. No, sorry, I was actually going to get to one point. He lost weight today, and they write about him in the newspaper as a normal human being. Look at fat cat's no longer fat. But he's still racist, yeah. He's still a racist. And it's not just, he wasn't just racist against Indians. He then got caught being racist against black South Africans as well. He's been racist across racial borders, is all I'm saying.
I was saying that the thing is that Mahatma Kote hasn't reached India. I don't think many people remember that at all. I do not know why I remembered. And during one of the previous episodes of this pod, we had a whole segment on him. But
so he actually dressed as a Sikh, right?
He's dressed as a Sikh.
So the name and the makeup actually didn't even make much. It's not just racist; it's stupid racist. So I mean, no research done on his racism actually. So.
No, I mean, in those days, he would never. Look, he's an idiot, right? He's an actual idiot. His stand-up comedy is beyond stupid, right? I mean, he is a dumb human being, but there's a bit of Sreesanth about him. There's a bit of natural person. Do you know what I mean? He's the sort of bloke that if you were out at the pub and he said a shit joke, you'd probably go, "Oh, what a racist!" But you would laugh at something he said at one stage, right? And also, he's not that much different than a lot of the guys that I grew up, that were, my dad's friends, and we came from quite a progressive working class sort of part of Australia, but there was a lot of racism within that progressive working class system as well. I've got family members who lifelong left-wing progressives who voted against the Gay Marriage Act vote in Australia. It's a weird place like that. You talk about India being conservative. Australia is incredibly conservative as a place, and living away from it, I see it every day. And it's a really interesting thing. But it was a very weird time, that mid-90s, where everything was coming together. And again, it was pre-Twitter and pre-blogs, and he was at the right place at the right time. Billy Birmingham wouldn't have had a career doing the 12th Man tapes 10 years later. He just wouldn't have been able to do it.
I think if Gautam Gambhir was a bit funnier, he could have done an Australian version of Mahatma Kote in India. But you could
do that. I mean, yeah. Anyway, look, there are certainly Australian cricketers who, when you get them behind closed doors, still put on Indian accents and wobble their heads from side to side. But I'd be lying if I haven't had lots of negative stuff about being an Australian in England as well. Do you know what I mean? It's helped me in my career as well. But you get that, typical Aussie, blah, 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 blah sort of stuff. And he's uncouth. and all that sort of stuff. Like, we all have our stereotypes that we go with. It's just that it's not really, I'm a white Australian, and I put a suit on and I blend into the crowd. Whereas, racism, that kind of open racism is, the reason that it is so horrendous is because you can't whiteface in the same to change up. So it's ridiculous, and he's a joke of a human being. And honestly, I wish he was never mentioned again.
I'm sorry. I'm so
and-
sorry. It's
no,
just
no, it's good. It's good. I think it's good that you can got an Australian on who could come in. So Telford Vice, who really rebroke it open, he was still doing Cricket Australia. I don't want to say Cricket Australia functions, but like he was still doing stand-up comedy, his kind of stand-up comedy, not in brownface. To be fair, Mahatma had been retired, but the same kind of stand-up comedy in the Gabba. Right up until you can have a look. Telford Vice wrote a piece. If you find Greg Bree, it's not that long ago, right? And he was still in the ground being racist at cricket events. Fuck you, Greg Ritchie. Fuck off.
so
Anyway.
so keeping up the morale and the same level of annoyance. What is, and this is I promise this is going to be the last question. What is the thing that annoys you the most about cricket, and that you possibly would want to change? Secondly, we often talk about like Rahul Bhattacharya's piece on Chandrapal or Fernando's piece on Hera. Who is a person who you'd possibly want to write such a long form piece about? So annoys, and then who you love, basically.
I think I've written most of my long form pieces. What would I change? I think there's nonsense that it's a conservative sport. Women were playing it professionally in the 1800s. Tell you what, women weren't playing much sport in the 1800s anywhere. It was the first sport to do a bunch of things. It was basically the first modern international sport, right? It has evolved massively and continues to evolve. And yet we keep saying we can't change anything about it. And it's like, well, that's only because you don't know anything about it. If you think cricket hasn't changed, then you don't know anything about cricket. That's the thing. That's the thing that essentially holds us back, I think. Other than the fact that the way it's, I mean, I could give you a real technical point and say that until we have an independent ICC that makes decisions that is in the best, in the best interest of cricket as a sport, we'll never go forward. But the basic thing is that we have a bunch of people who think it's a conservative sport and it's always been run this way. It has to be run this way. And they are wrong and idiotic and they get in the way and they ruin every conversation about everything. So there's that. I mean, I've written, those sorts of pieces that you're talking about that Rahul and that Fernando have written. I mean, I've written them, haven't I? I've written the Asif Karim was a huge one for me. To be able to write. Sorry?
Does Asif Karim still message you?
Yeah, of course. All the time. Lovely man. He, it's to be able to write an 8,000 word piece on a guy that was remembered for one spell and make it so that 100,000 people read it. That's such an honor to be in that situation. Chandrapal and Harath are at least famous cricketers, so to be able to do that. There's another one that, I don't know if as many people read it, but a lot of people read it, was the MLI, the Indian. Let's stop talking about India for 2 seconds. The Hong Kong women's captain.
Uh-huh.
What an incredible honor it was to go back and write about her. Sean Tate's spell was another one, and Aubrey Faulkner. Aubrey Faulkner is too great a cricketer and not great.
I have read your book on Test cricket, and I can totally see, like you adore him, basically.
Yeah, well, there's another 7,000 words that didn't make my book. If you want to read that piece, I mean, I think if you're talking about there's all the four people I've talked about there, and Sreesanth, I suppose, is another one. There's a sort of a mismatch with history. I think Harath was always going to be remembered as great. Chandrapal, though, to be fair to Rahul, I think needed that piece, but no one was going to write a piece on Asif Karim. Sean Tate was the second fastest bowler probably in the history of cricket and was already being forgotten. MLI, no one even knew she existed. Sreesanth, I think the whole story needed to be told properly for the first time. And who's the other one we're talking about? Aubrey Faulkner. So you can sort of see that those are the things I'm trying to do. I'm trying to right wrongs at a certain level with those sorts of pieces that I write.
I will be eagerly waiting for your Salman Butt piece then.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that because he deserves everything. And if I wrote a Salman Butt piece, it would be the other way. But even someone like Michael Clark. So, the sort of pieces you're talking about, I probably wrote a 4,000 or 5,000 word piece on Michael Clark when he retired. And I think there's been so much bullshit written about Michael Clark that needed to be written properly. I now know David Warner a little bit. When he comes towards the end, I might get him to sit down with me for a couple of days. Davey may or may not do it, depending on whether he thinks it's worth it. But that would be a very interesting piece. There's a few other guys. I've been in talks to write books for players and former players as well. All those sorts of things. For me, there's got to be that thing. But, I think I think that I think that Fernando and Raul, maybe Raul I will take out of this, but I think the Fernando piece, and there's been other great pieces like that. They're not, I don't get driven to write about the famous cricketers in the same way that everyone else does, unless there's a real disconnect between who they are and how they're seen, or if I think that their place in history is damaged. So that's why I go after the more random thing. I've got a bunch of big features that I've been working on and will be working on, and I wouldn't say any of them are massively well-known cricketers. You would know most of them, a bit in the way that you know Sreesanth, a bit in the way that you know Sean Tate, but they're not those sorts of things. I'd honestly rather write, if something incredible on the four leg spinners of South Africa, or Rachel Hayhoe Flint, or someone like that.
A Jade Dernbach versus Ben Stokes.
Well, Jade Dernbach's do you know what? He's one of the most interesting modern cricketers. If you go back and you search my name and Jade Dernbach, see how often I mention him. He's such an interesting guy for many different reasons. One is he was ahead of the game, and he worked out that being a death bowler was a certain thing. But the thing is that we hadn't worked out advanced, metrics to work out that he was a good death bowler. So he just got shelved. And he got worked out by batsmen in a really interesting way. Then he became a person who would slag back at people on Twitter when that wasn't even a thing. I find Jay Dernbach a really interesting person. So someone like him, I find far more interesting. I mean, look, I've written 6,000 words on Pankaj Singh. Who the fuck else would do that? Pankaj Singh's family wouldn't write that many thousand words.
We did an episode on Pankaj Singh because that's the kind of thing that we love.
Yeah. So I think, so when you ask what one sort of story like that I'm going to write, I've probably written 10 like that. It's just that they're sort of spread out a little bit more. And I love that kind of form of journalism. And those two guys, they're both absolutely, ridiculously talented writers. Raul's obviously a novelist. I could see Fernando becoming a novelist. I'm probably a slightly different kind of writer than those two, but I think we're all in that sort of, we love those sort of long form things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to get anyone to let you do it. I promise you that.
Those are the two other writers that come to mind when I read you. So that's why those came to my mind. I will end with so we usually do recommendations. So anything that you've been recently watching on Netflix, or any book that you've been reading that you'd like to recommend our listeners?
Do you know what? I've been working really hard recently on all my stuff. So I've got, I've got the Red Inca podcast that's just come out.
Oh,
yeah.
I've got the I've got Double Century podcast, which is about the history of cricket. Aubrey Faulkner gets a mention again. Pankaj Singh doesn't get a mention, but he might in a future episode. I've got the video channel on YouTube.
I was going to mention that, like your last video about non-cricketers cricketing 11, like it was a small video, but not only I got informed of so many other people. I think I probably only knew I think you had Michael Jordan in there. Or no, you had like the basketball player that you had in that.
LeBron James.
That's.
Yeah.
And other than him and Dhyanchand, I probably didn't know anyone else. So it
was quite telling how many Asian people said they couldn't especially Indian and Pakistani. Sri Lankans not so much, I noticed, but so many Asian, Indian, and Pakistani fans would contact me and go, I wouldn't know how to do this. I don't know anyone else.
Yeah.
Which I found quite interesting. So I've got that. So I've got some video essays coming up. So at the moment, we've done mostly shorter videos and fun videos, but there's some
Do you
really
have
longer stuff.
any plans to bring back the Cricket Series Star? That's like my favorite cricket podcast ever.
I tried to. The problem is, me and Zoltzman have so many things. I mean, look. I've mentioned what Red Inca, Double Century, the YouTube. I haven't mentioned my new radio show on Talksport. So there's a fourth one, and I'm missing something else that I'm. Oh, I've got other podcast stuff and other stuff going on. I've got all that going on. Zoltzman's a bit the same as me in that me and Zoltzman are very creative people, and if we come up with a good idea, we kind of want to make it. And so we want to do Cricket Series Tower. It's just finding the time where we're both available. But I would certainly do that in a heartbeat. It's just, and actually, weirdly, me and him are quite close and we actually live near each other. It was actually a good way of us seeing each other and chatting and catching up. That's not quite the same now that he can't come over. So, things have changed a little bit. But yeah, all those sorts of things. I've got the Patreon now as well. I'm looking into doing a Substack and maybe writing on my own. A little bit frustrated with all the sort of cricket publications at a certain level. Plus, they can't afford to hire me anymore since the whole COVID thing. So, look, I'm watching The Last Dance at the moment, which I'm episode 7 into, but I don't really need to tell anyone that that's good. I think you guys most people know. I mean, I just went back and rewatched all the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm actually going to do a huge special on them.
You wrote a piece, and I know this is a cricket, but you remember? I mean, I guess it was a few years ago about how Ant-Man and Endgame kind of invalidate the Back to the Future. Biff Tannen's existence. Remember? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah, it was on The Ringer.
I loved it.
Well, this is a weird thing. So I really have had trouble moving out of cricket, and it's because I'm known so much as a cricket guy. But the funny thing is, when I joined ESPN, and when I joined Cricinfo, there was talk about me doing 50% basketball, 50% cricket, because I knew I was a basketball guy, right? And now if I've still never written a professional piece about basketball, and yet, anyone who knows me, half of my story is about basketball. It's ridiculous. And then the other thing is, I'm a filmmaker, and I've been a film nerd my entire life. So I've got all these ideas. So on the YouTube channel, I've got a John Wick idea. I've got a Margot Robbie idea. I don't know if you guys know who Alan Dale is, but he's this legendary New Zealand actor who was in an Australian soap opera and then moved over to America in like his 50s or something, and he's now in everything. If you Google Alan Dale, you'll be like, oh my God, I know this guy because he's been in all these movies and all these TV shows. So I've got a project on him. I've got a project on Marvel. I've got a project on Keanu Reeves.
Please
ready to go.
Do the John Wick one. I'm a huge fan.
My John Wick one is so good. Like, I don't want to say what it is just because I don't want anyone to do it before I get a chance to do it. But it is. It's such a good idea, and look, I am that kind of guy. It just hasn't really happened. And when I was kind of a bit unlucky. Like, I'm kind of know a lot of the American sports writers because I'm the big cricket writer, and because I'm in I write analytics and features. That's kind of what American sports writers do. So I kind of know all the analytics, a lot of the analytics guys, and a lot of the feature writers. Wright Thompson and those sorts of guys, and Sam Miller and Ben Lindbergh, and I know them. I bumped into them. They use me as a reference. I use them. In fact, it was Wright Thompson was one who had to change the podcast. I was supposed to be doing a podcast with him tonight, and so I've been like, how have I not managed to work more for The Ringer when you guys read Cricket with Balls? It was basically a pop culture cricket blog, and I just haven't had a chance to do it. And it's been frustrating me. So the YouTube channel for me is almost going back to my roots and being able to do all that sort of stuff. And, if you watch the YouTube channel, how many pop culture references and random things are on? Like today, there's a picture of David Warner as Fabio. And, you have to be a certain age to remember Fabio. And, those sorts of things and popping up over and over again. And I love doing that sort of stuff. So the YouTube channel allows me to do that. And I love cricket, but I say this a lot. I'll I'll never be 100. I'll never only work in cricket again, just because the industry frustrates me so much. I love cricket and I love writing, but I don't always love cricket writing. So if I can write about other things and other sports and movies and stuff, I think that would actually keep me writing in cricket longer than having to do it full time. So yeah, so I can't do too much, but I've read a lot of great books. I think most of the recent books I've written have been analytics driven. So if you're into analytics, you know, I really liked Kirk Goldsberry's book. What's that called? Oh my guys, is it Splash? Why can't I remember? Kirk Goldsberry book basketball. It's got like a cool title, and I can't remember. Sprawl Ball. Sprawl Ball. Yeah, so I like Sprawl Ball. That was really good. Keith Law's book was good when I read that. Reading a lot of scientific sports books at the moment, which are a bit dry, but some of them are great as well. If you want novels, I read a lot of Harlan Ellison short stories, and I like Elmore. God, I can't remember any writer's name. I'm reading a lot of Elmore stuff as well at the moment. But yeah, Harlan Ellison. I read those to my kids and try and edit out the really creepy bits.
I have been a huge fan of everything cricket that you write, and I have read a few of your non-cricketing stuff as well. As I just mentioned, the Back to the Future piece. I would recommend your podcast, Red Inker, specifically the few latest episodes that you did about Ray Price, then Patrick Patterson,
And the South
my
African, yeah.
that has been my personal favorite. I really wish and this is just like a wish that at some point you get someone like a Ram Guha in your pod and talk about caste in Indian cricket, because
Or even
that's like
Shada Ugra would be a great choice.
yeah,
Yeah,
potentially.
I hadn't really thought of them. Actually, Rahul Bhattacharya I should probably get on to talk about the shift piece as well. I should send him a message. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I'm sort of... I basically thought to myself, I had this idea for Crick Info, and they kind of shit the bed when it came to podcasts a little bit.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
because I wanted to be their podcast editor. I wanted to really take it forward, and they didn't get it. And one of the ideas, and this was a long time ago, I was like, we have all these incredible writers writing all these incredible pieces. Just interview them about the piece when it comes out. And so I've been trying to do that. And I've been trying to remember all my friends who've written good pieces or stories that are interesting. And I remember when I contact Tristan about Ray Price, he's just like, how are we going to make a podcast about this? And I was like, Ray Price is an interesting cricketer. And there's a lot of twist to him. You've just written a piece on him. Trust me, this is a thing. And I think that for most writers, they kind of go to the most obvious things, where I'm just like, how is it possible that a cricketer as random as Ray Price played for the Mumbai Indians and we don't know more about this? Yeah.
That was fascinating story.
And the Patrick Patterson story is a perfect example of Patrick. No one was talking about Patrick Patterson when Barrett went and wrote that. No one had mentioned Asif Karim. I think me and Tim Wigmore probably wrote the only two pieces on Asif Karim for like 10 years, right? At that point, when we wrote that, no one's looking into these guys, but they're incredible stories, and there's plenty of them out there. And that's what I wanted Red Inker to be, is either an issue that really needed to be talked about, or getting to the bottom of the story. Like, how does Wright Thompson end up writing about Indian cricket? How does that happen? How does he convince his editors? And, all those sorts of things. And I'm lucky enough that I've been around long enough. I know most of these people. I can send a WhatsApp to Harsha and go, Harsha, I need you on the podcast. And he says, not now, piss off. And Harsha would never say piss off. He would never even pretend to say piss off. He's probably upset I've said he would say piss off, even as a joke. But you know what I mean? Like, I can do that. And I wanted it. I could easily... I thought with Red Inker, and you see this, Sky are doing this, and a few of my other friends are doing this. They're just getting famous person. I was like, yeah, it's an easy time to get famous people. I don't care about famous people. What I want is interesting stories or topics. And, Adam Collins talking about no balls, and Andy Balbirnie talking about his career. No one knows anything about Andy Balbirnie, and he's suddenly just the best player in Ireland. Like, no one knows anything about him. 2 years ago, his name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Those sorts of players, I think, are really, really interesting, and those sort of stories and topics. So it's been exactly what I wanted that podcast to be. So I'm so happy that people have really taken to it, because it's funny you say, the last 3 episodes. I'm like, the last 3 episodes have been about race in South African cricket a West Indian cricketer who everyone had forgotten, and a Zimbabwean cricketer no one noticed the first time he played. Like the fact that those episodes aren't speaking to you means the podcast is working.
I think it's perhaps at this point one of the best podcasts out there, cricket podcasts out there. And I mean, as I said, caste is often something that is not really talked about, even in
You're right.
general in India. But like if you look at the team composition of any Indian team across time, you will be surprised that how heavily, and by heavily I mean like 99.9% of it has been from, in fact, something, and I don't know if this should be kept in a podcast or not, but something interesting happened on Twitter recently. Ravin Jadeja posted a video. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah,
He
I do know
the
this.
sword play.
The sword, yeah.
Did you notice the sword play?
It's literally I've used that sword play in one of my projects. It's coming up in
So
one of my videos because so
so
I think I know where you're going.
no, but yeah, I do not know. Like, if you're going the same place, then it's amazing. But the thing is, it's, to me, it's like it's like someone saying in America, someone saying that, why is it wrong if I talk about me being proud of being a white person,
Mm.
something like that. And that is, and I don't blame him, because I honestly give everyone, like, I think stupidity is a primary cause of a lot of these things, and maybe he just has not thought about it. But because he does come from a humble background, but it just comes across as very um, unintelligent, casteist thing to do. But anyway, I did not want to end this podcast on this sour note.
No,
I
no, but
love your,
that
yeah,
sort of
sorry.
stuff is that sort of stuff is so interesting to me. So I probably wouldn't have written a piece for it on Cricket Info, partly because I have so many Indian writers, and I'm just not over that topic as much as I should. I'm very good on cricket. I'll write about Bangladesh and Ramiz Raja because I'm over that. But the caste system, I just think that other people should be writing about that. But as you guys have probably seen, I read a 9,000 word piece on Australian cricket culture. So I'm not afraid to tackle those sorts of things. But the caste thing, I've just never been 100%. But I remember I went through the comments on that, and it was such an interesting comment thread that I thought there's a 10,000 word feature on just the comments from all different parts. There were middle class people, I think, with Western ideals who saw it one way. There were local, Indian people who looked down on him because they kept saying, well, that tribe wasn't very good. I can't remember their exact words, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Then there
They
was,
lost a lot of.
yeah, and there were all these, but there was like 4 or 5 different subplots of I found it endlessly fascinating, and that's the kind of thing that I kind of like, and I really, that's what I follow. Yeah, I didn't mean to write. I didn't mean to end up being popular. I've basically become popular by writing about so many unpopular things and so many weird small things. It just happens to be that I suppose in cricket there's so many people obsessed with different weird tiny things like that. But that's all where all those sorts of things come from. And yes, okay, I'm going to have to write a feature on Virat Kohli, but along the way, my God, am I going to find some random cricketers to stuff in around him?
His coach, for example, is an interesting character to talk about. But with that note, I will thank you, Jarrod, for being with us and talking. We're closing to 2 hours, so thank you so much. It was, and it's a wrap.